We want to talk today about building a godly home. There was not much emphasis on the home in the Old Covenant. You don't read instructions there much about husbands and wives, how they have to relate to each other. A few instructions on how to bring up children. But the testimony of the home was not considered a very important thing under the Old Covenant. It was the total testimony of the nation of Israel. And all that God said was He wanted godly children. But once we move into the New Covenant, there's a tremendous emphasis on the home. Jesus very often went to homes. And the most wonderful example of all, it says in Ephesians 5 that the relationship between Christ and the church is to be demonstrated in homes. Do you know that as a husband and wife, you're supposed to demonstrate to the world around you the relationship between Christ and the church? That's in Ephesians chapter 5. You know that passage very well. Verse 23 onwards. How a husband must relate to his wife exactly like Christ relates to the church, and how a wife must relate to her husband exactly like the church relates to Christ. And there's a lot of misunderstanding here, a lot of false understanding. You know, I went to many churches in my life, and throughout all these places and many different churches in India that I attended, never once in all my life, in all those churches, did I attend a meeting where the meeting was for husbands and wives and parents, instructing them. In our churches, it's become a regular feature in every conference to have meetings for husbands and wives. Some of you who have only grown up in the church take 101 things for granted. You know, many times I wish that children who have grown up in our church would go outside and be in another church for 2 years. They'll come back with such fantastic gratitude. Even some grown-up people here, they need once in a while to go for 2 years somewhere else. Sometimes when I've had to discipline somebody in this church in past years, I've told them, stay away from the church for 2 months. And they've realized what they've missed. 2 months is enough. We must never take the church and all that we receive in the church for granted as though we deserve these things. God has revealed to us some of the greatest truths that in most other churches they never hear. They are missing messages concerning the Christian home. And if you take it lightly, I want to tell you, you're going to be the loser. It's the ones who are really grateful and thankful for the church who build the best homes. And if you're not building a good home, begin to ask yourself, are you thankful for the church? Do you teach your children to be thankful for the church? All of us want our children to grow up well, sure. That doesn't mean anything. Even the godless people in the world want their children to grow up well. That doesn't mean you're a godly person. But when you don't criticize people in your home, when you don't criticize other members of the church in your home, but seek to teach your children to value them, that's the way your children will grow up. If they sense, and you don't have to speak anything. You know, children have got a sense to pick up what their parents feel. And I've seen that through the years here, to different people, some who are still here and some who have left, at least in Bangalore. I've seen why some children, in the days when they were in their home, do not develop the way they should, because they sensed something in their parents of a critical attitude towards either the elders of the church or some people in the church. And you may have said nothing. The children picked it up. Who's the loser? Not the church, you. Aren't you the loser when your children are not wholehearted disciples? Is it God's will that any of our children should be half-hearted? Is it God's will that any of our children should be unconverted? No. If they are, my dear brothers and sisters, be like the thief on the cross and say, I am to blame. Don't blame it on circumstances and situations and other things. You perhaps have been critical, judgmental, either both husband and wife or one of them. Now, I'll tell you something. Every situation can be redeemed. That's the good news. Whatever your failure may be in the past, it can be resolved and solved, but only if you first acknowledge your iniquity. If you try to cover it up, there are some people who do something wrong to you, and they'll never come and apologize. They'll come to you and say, oh, hello, everything is nice. They act as if nothing is wrong. Such people have never settled the matter because they never apologized for the wrong they did. And just because they act nice and the other person is gracious enough to act nice to you doesn't mean it's settled. 100 years later, when you stand at the judgment seat of Christ, it'll come up. Say, you never apologized. Oh, but we behaved nicely. Yeah, but you never apologized for the wrong you did. Acknowledge your iniquity. Just because somebody else is gracious enough to overlook and forgive you doesn't mean that everything is okay. God helps us when He sees that we humble ourselves like the thief on the cross and say, I am to blame. Otherwise, like Adam, we cover it all up and pretend that everything is okay. Now, I just want to say those words in introduction, because that was the problem with our forefather Adam. He couldn't take the blame for his own sin. Jesus, on the other hand, took the blame for the sins of the whole world. Be like Jesus, not like Adam. That's one of the fundamental principles of a marriage. If you're a father and you made a mistake, tell your children, I'm sorry for what I did. That was my mistake. And submission is something that begins with God. And so the relationship, some parts of our Bible are torn out because we are influenced by our culture. So we want to think of the husband and the wife and children. These are three things we want to think about. The first law of God or principle of God in marriage is the one commandment in the Bible that is written before sin came into the world. When sin came into the world, it was Genesis chapter 3. But there's only one commandment in the Bible, only one, given before sin came into the world. And that's not the commandment to Adam, because that doesn't apply to us. There's another commandment for us. The only commandment in the Bible before sin came into the world. And that commandment is in the Genesis 2:24, which says, a man shall leave his father and mother and be joined to his wife, and they shall become one flesh. And that was written at a time when Adam did not have a father and mother. So who was it written for? It wasn't written for Adam. It was written for us. Therefore shall a man leave his father and mother and cleave unto his wife. And in Psalm 45 and verse 10, it says, listen, O daughter, to the wife, give attention. Forget your people and your father's house. So will your bridegroom, the king, desire your beauty. So there's a word for men and there's a word for women. Forget your father's house. That doesn't mean don't care for your parents. It means forget your attachment to them now. It doesn't mean a husband should not care for his parents. It means you should leave them emotionally, be attached to your wife. When it says to the wife, forget your father's house, it doesn't mean you don't care for them. It means you're now not attached to them. You're attached to your... I'll tell you this. If you don't obey God's laws, you're going to not have a proper foundation for your marriage. And a lot of unhappy homes, in India particularly, are because people don't obey this law. In Western countries, they leave their father and mother pretty early, long before they are married, but they have other problems which cause divorce there. That we come to later. But in India, one of the first problems is that when people get married, there's very little attachment to one another. It's probably because a lot of marriages are arranged. But arranged or not arranged, once you're married, your wife must be first, not your parents. Your parents may have more wisdom, and it's nothing wrong in consulting them, but decisions must be taken between you and your wife, between you and your husband. And you have to say, if you don't start from day one like that, now I'm not attached to my parents. I love them, I care for them. If they're in need, I'll help them. And if they are in financial need, you must send them money. They took care of you when you were in financial need as a baby and as a student. It's absolutely righteous for you to take care of them when they are old and they are in financial need, sure. But other than that, your attachment must not be to them. Your attachment must be to your wife. And sisters, if you're married, your attachment must be to your husband. Now you can listen to this, but do you see a lack in your own life? Do you feel that you have not done that so far? Do you feel that your wife feels that you're more attached to your parents than to her? Does your husband feel that you're more attached to your parents, sisters, than to him? How do they sense that? They sense that. You can theoretically say, no, I'm attached to you. But it's not a question of theory. It's a question of an actual practice. Is your husband first in your thinking? Is your wife first? It must be like that in human relationships. And the reason why it's not like that, let me tell you this. The reason why it is not like that is because most, even Christians in India, do not fear God enough to obey His laws. When I got married, the reason I decided that I'd be emotionally attached to my wife more than to my parents was because I feared God. And I respected His laws. And I want to say I've been married 38 years and I'm very happily married. You obey God's laws, it only goes well with you. There's a verse in the Old Testament, I think it's Deuteronomy 4, which says, God says, oh, can you imagine God saying, oh, that my people would keep my laws so that it can go well with them. It's the cry of a father, seeing his children mess up their life and saying, I wish they would listen to me. I wish they would know that I, as God who ordained marriage, know better than them what is good for them, that they won't be so stupid to think that they know better than me. When I tell them leave father and mother, it's for their good. When I tell them forget your father's house, it's for their good. But they are so stupid and proud, they think they know better than me. God says, I feel sad for them because I know they're going to mess up their life. And once you've messed up your life, it's so difficult to restore it. There's a saying in the world, prevention is better than cure. It's always better to prevent something than after creating a mess to try and solve it. So right from the beginning, those of you who are newly married are extremely lucky to hear these things from day one. Be attached to your wife, be attached to your husband more than to your relatives. By all means, care for them, help them, but remember Jesus. For 30 years, he was at home. And one day he left home. It was like getting married to his father now. And then when his mother came in the marriage of Cana, he said, woman, what have I got to do with you? His mother was absolutely shocked. Is this the one who always said, yes, mommy, yes, mommy, yes, mommy, for 30 years? Now turning around and saying, woman, what have I to do with you? Jesus is our example. You can't be more spiritual than Jesus. Put God first. You'll have a very happy marriage if you obey His laws.